just put up a virtual background and then start coughing and you'll
Amazon Music.
disappear. Okay, we're going to use Melina's PowerPoint, which is right here. Do you all see that?
Yes.
Awesome. So, you can scroll or you can click on the slide. Faith and everyday life.
Good morning, everyone. If it's okay, I just wanted to begin with a prayer. So let us pray. Gracious and loving God, we want to just thank you for this morning, for this time to spend together in talking about our lives and faith. And we just ask that you continue to be present with our world and our country, whether we fall in the place of excitement and relief or heartbreak at this time. We just ask, oh God, that you be present with all of us in the work that we have to continue to do and in the joys that we can celebrate at this time. We lift these all in your loving Son's name. Amen.
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 So for my topic today, we're going to be talking about faith and everyday life. This is a topic that has always been an interest of me, the idea of what does faith mean to me after I leave church on a Sunday. So there's all these practices that I do, and then what do they mean when I'm at home? And this brings me to a book that I found, Rowan Williams, Being Christian, Baptism, Bible, Eucharist, and Prayer. This book is doing exactly what I was looking more on. And when reading this book, not everyone is going to agree with everything that Rowan Williams is saying, but he is taking these different important aspects of our Christian faith, baptism, Bible, and Eucharist and prayer, and talking about them in deeper ways and leaving room for us to reflect on what does that mean in just everyday life. And what I'm going to do in this presentation is, so this book sparked an 8-week session, formation session, an adult formation. And I'm going to share with you how I created that session. So you're going to get the beginning parts of these 8-week sessions. So to begin, I looked at what does life and meaning actually mean? So we're going to start generally with a little bit of psychology, and then we're going to go in a little bit deeper into what does this mean with faith and just life in general. Can everybody see the screen?
Yes.
Good? And then at the end, you guys can ask questions if there's any that come up. So Felicity Kelcourse states in her book, Human Development and Faith, that whether a theory is focused on the inner lives of a person or on the broader context of society, each of us in one way or another, and all of us together, need reason to live and a way to find meaning in existence. So when meaning eludes us, or when life appears to be grim and pointless, those theories of development may offer a way to uncover the psychological origins of our distress, which can point us in a way to more healthy and wholesome activities and behaviors. This meaning, which humans are constantly searching for in their lives, as Kelcourse describes, is in constant friction and in constant formation with the challenges and hardships of life. However, if one can be purposeful in paying attention to how these situations may be causing either the friction or the growth, or how they're impacting a person's formation and overall development, a path towards a more healthy and wholesome experience can be created. So humans are capable of making meaning with the things that give us experiences of growth and with the things that challenge us. So how does this all connect to faith? Keeping the same concept that we just talked about before in mind, it becomes crucial for people in the position of teaching faith and formation to think about how these theories of human development and intentional reflection and formation might be relevant to teaching Christians. Kalkors describes, as the ground that we find to stand on as we face the ordinary challenges and unexpected storms of life, the fruit of our search is for meaning. So if faith is a key aspect in that meaning, people try to find in their lives, as mentioned above, it is also then a key aspect or worldview in the impact when changes and challenges arise. Kalkors continues to say, to be human is to be in relationship with the moment of conception. The development of human consciousness is a process of meeting and increasingly rich and complex knowing and experiencing of oneself in its context. There is never a moment of human existence without a surrounding environment or a sensational and relational, beginning with experience of the mother herself as the total environment and living, breathing home. Our faith then is not isolated from all these experiences that we have. The foundation of our faith formation is our very personhood, the experiences that we face, and how these moments of reflection and experience connect to it. So faith is just one pillar that can help us grow and sustain and maintain the house of meaning, making in turn a complicated world from collapsing or self-destructing. So if we go in a little bit deeper to Christianity, a person who is baptized is a Christian who through baptism has a larger family in the church. This family can provide resources and love, like when you take care of a sick mother, help somebody in the face of illness, and or help find meaningful work in the world. The practice of faith is made relevant because it helps people reflect on their experiences of life and sorts those experiences into wisdom and relationship that creates faith. As one learns about practices in their faith, one must also consider how those practices impact other parts of their life, their relationships, and what they're facing. So having faith is constantly considering how all of our life events within a relationship of God and within a relationship of others. So if we think now of our church, if we think particularly about the Episcopal Church, faith in formation and education has been a central concept for parishes. It is described in Fashion Me a People curriculum in the church by Maria Harris this way. Education in the church is lifelong. This is too obvious to bear repetition, too obvious until we begin to see how major are the revisions this belief demands in our educational curriculum. Still, education in the church as lifelong must be our starting point because the pastoral vocation is lifelong. For people called by the gospel into baptism and confirmation, there's no time in our life when that call ends. So since formation in our faith is ongoing, and the formation needs to include both the educational piece, right? So why the church does what it does, with the part of how does this become relevant for me in my own life? The educational piece of formation that teaches about what the church believes is also known as catechesis. This was found during the Renaissance Reformation in the 16th century when the Protestants and Catholics were inspired by religious instruction in the time where that was the time where we first met this word. The educational portion combined with the personal reflection, hopefully, is an interactive way, which initially created this 8-week session around Rowan Williams' book that helped create questions, left room for reflection, and it also just taught more about what is baptism, Bible, Eucharist, and prayer, and then created conversation that helped with developing faith. So with that little psychological and the faith piece said, initially, this is what created an 8-week session. The first 2 sessions focused on baptism. The second 2 sessions focused on Bible. The next 2 sessions focused on Eucharist, and the last 2 sessions focused on prayer. And what it did was, in the first session, we talked a lot more about what is the thing that we're looking at for that week. So what is baptism in our church? What is a little bit of the history? Just to get us to start thinking about what does this all mean? And then the second week of the session went and focused on the meaning of it in our own lives, which is where this chart was created. So if we look at this chart and we put baptism in the center, then we can start to think about, okay, for me in my life, what does baptism mean? And then start to connect it into all these other parts and systems that we encounter daily. So what does it mean for me in my relationship with God? What does it mean in my relationship with my family? What does it mean in my relationship with my church? And then what does it mean in my relationship with my community? And start to explore some of the ways that are challenged, and then some of the ways that are strong, and then some of the ways that we are still questioning and thinking about this in our everyday lives. So an example would be, I am baptized Christian, and then I go into work. If my work is secular and has nothing to do with my faith, how do I still continue to practice my faith in that setting? And what I'm going to do right now is read from Rowan Williams' book, just a portion of what he talks about in baptism. So this is found on page 17, and he says, "Remember that the depths of God's love still surround you. And when you sin as a baptized person, you are not, as it were, stepping right outside of the depths of God's love, unless, of course, you are fully and consciously decided to do so. Rather, it is though that you are deliberately ignoring the depths all around you and not letting the reality of the world's needs and the reality of God's love through. So what you need to do is to take the shutters down again, and you will find that every prayer of penitence that you pray is taking down of the shutters and letting the baptismal depths well up around and within you. And that brings us right back to where we started. The chaos of human life and disorder and the wind of the Spirit blowing over it, and the embodied love of God, going down into the waters and being drawn out again in a blaze of light from heaven. This is my Son. A baptized community lives in that mystery, drawn out of chaos, breathing in the wind of the Spirit and hearing from God the words that speaks to his only Son. You can call me Father." So he talks about baptism in a way that becomes more relevant to us. And he talks about it in ways that are questioning the difficult questions. So what does it mean to be baptized and still participate in sin? What does it mean to be baptized, but also sometimes be confused of how do I live that out? And then the session would focus on diving deeper and people would be able to share. So the next part is looking at the Bible. Again, the same concept, right? What does Bible mean in our church? What is the history of the Bible, and how do we use it? And then to go dive in deeper and to connect, how is this relevant in my life, right? We hear about the gospel, we hear about the Old Testament in church every Sunday, and then how does that connect when I leave church? What does it do for my connection with God? Do I participate in any way in the Bible and my family? What does it mean for the greater community and for me within my church? And then I wanted to read now a section from Rowan Williams' chapter on the Bible. He says, "Reading the Bible is about building analogies between then and now, and recognizing them in our story. And developing and maturing in the reading of the Bible involves coming to recognize patterns of faithful and unfaithful responses to God in the light of Jesus. That is what begins to happen when you make Christ the center and focus of your prayerful reading. So here he talks about how does the Bible that was written so long ago for a different group of people in a different concept then become relevant to us today? And to look at those analogies of back then, and in some ways finding the connection to how they are important now, right? For a lot of us, when we hear the sermons or when we do our own Bible study, we find there is deep connection and that it does become relevant. And it is saying something even to us many, many, many years later. So that's a little bit on the Bible portion. So the next portion is looking at the Eucharist. The Eucharist, I know, is something that we haven't been able to participate in a while. For some of us, maybe we have gotten it, but it has changed. But this section is to look deeper on what does Eucharist mean, right? Again, the same concept of when I take Eucharist, what does that do for me in my relationship with God? When I take Eucharist, does it transform me in any way when I go back home to my family? In that moment when I'm taking it with my community, my church, and then when I go back out into the world. And I wanted to now read another portion from Rowan Williams' chapter on Eucharist. God has called us into being because he wants our company, and redemption would make no sense if it were not the same creative longing for our community that was involved. The creating and transforming Spirit of God, calling us once again into life because of that eternal desire for our company, not a divine need that we are summoned into existence to satisfy, but an overflowing divine generosity that seeks to share itself more and more with what is our other. So in that little portion, I really like that from Rowan Williams because it's a reminder that when we are present in the moment of Eucharist, right, it's not just us going forward to receive something. It's a reminder that in that exchange, God wants our company. God wants our presence and our relationship. And reflecting on that and our own lives, we would dive deeper into, okay, what does Eucharist mean for us? And then the last two sessions would focus on prayer. Prayer is this thing that most of us do, right? In one way or another. We have communal prayer that we do during Sundays and Saturdays. And then we have individual prayer. There's many different types of prayer. There's contemplative prayer. There's prayer where we're just speaking to God. There's our Thanksgivings, the things we're thankful for. And this last two sections helps us to dive deeper on what does prayer really mean for me in my everyday life? What does it mean in relationship to God, my family, my community, and church? And with this section, as I've been doing with the rest, I wanted to read a portion of Rowan Williams' chapter on prayer. With that in mind, Origen reminds us that prayer is always in Jesus rather than to Jesus. Then, as now, plenty of people were in the habit of chanting to Jesus as a friend, which is fine in its way. But the essence of prayer, as the New Testament presents it, is to let Jesus pray in you and take you into the very heart of God the Father or Mother. Just as Jesus empties himself out of love for us, we in return empty ourselves. We push away the selfish desires and the limiting images that crowd into our head. We make room, we empty our mind and our hearts so that the love of God can fill. So our prayer is what we may be made in oneness with the will and action of Jesus. So Williams is just talking about prayer as a way of a sort of emptying and letting in of Christ in our lives, which in turn connects us to God. And this is a little glimpse of the 4 different sections. And I wanted to now actually leave room for you all to ask some questions. Because at the end, I have a little bit of reflecting questions that I wanted to give each of us a time to think about, and a time to, if we still have some time, to share with one another. So this was just a little opening. Did anybody have any questions? How do I make this bigger? How do I make it bigger?
Oh. Do we want to unshare the?
Yeah, and then reshare again after.
Okay, let's do this. There, how's that?
That's good.
So, Melina, I have a question. Agree with this presentation 100%. I think our faith gives us meaning. I think it provides a sense of a belonging. It gives a social support group. In the case of our particular church, the Episcopal Church, I think it gives us a chance to reflect, even at an intellectual level, about some of the theological precepts that underline who we are. But here's my question, especially for you as a younger person. If all of these things are so important, why do so few people seem to think they're important? And why in particular do young people seem to think they're important, since the number of people who identify in conventional religious terms seems to be going down?
So if I'm hearing that correctly, John, you're asking why it is important, but at the same time, why those numbers are going down?
Right.
So they're important, right? They're important because there's this aspect of faith that is personal, which sometimes I think can be more difficult to talk about or to connect, just because life is complicated. And some of these concepts that we're studying can be really confusing or challenge us in ways that are really uncomfortable. So it's just easier to ignore it. And then I asked myself the question of how often do we take time for these reflections? When life is so busy, I think we're naturally doing them. But are they really the focus when we're in formation and when we're in church? And I took a class called Being Human, which also kind of helped with this whole concept. And we talked about the secular age and our church and how numbers are going down, and how a lot of these formation pieces that we've been doing that have been the same in some ways might need some changing up, right, to reach the audience that we are looking to reach. So people who right now, younger people, I can't speak for everybody, but are more focused on that spiritual aspect of faith. So what does the spiritual mean in my life? Which I think as of right now, we touch on, but not a lot. So that part is missing, which is why hopefully one of the ways I thought of being able to talk more about that spiritual part was through this 8-week session, which you all saw, the kind of beginning parts of like, how is this being constructed? I don't know if that answered your question. You can re-ask if it, okay, good.
So what reputation, hi, I'm on the side here, I'm semi-invisible. What reputation do Christian churches have among millennials?
Again, I cannot generally speak for everyone, but I think one of the things that is missing for people, it's one of the things that they're contemplating. One is that they are really busy. So the concept of going to a physical church worship every Sunday is something that is not sustainable for them anymore. And then the question of when they get there, are they really being fed? Is it doing something for them? So there's a lot of different surveys being put out there. There's a lot of different research studies that are beginning to form to ask people the question of, for you, when you go into church, what is missing? And I think that kind of is the bigger question in all of this, is what are we providing? If it's not being sustained as of right now, then in what ways, what are the things that are missing for you? And then are you willing to change them or adapt them?
I like to make some noise at this time. um, I was raised a Lutheran. I then I became I was saved in a Pentecostal church. Became a and then later I'm now an Anabaptist, which is Mennonites and Amish are Anabaptists. But I'm going to your church because of this one on my side of here, my wife. Now I say all that. I say all that just to hopefully dull what I'm about to say now. So, one of the things I really bristle at, which I hear about, is the word faith, and I'll tell you about that in a second. And the other one is the word spiritual, because I hear about spiritual stuff all the time. I mean, people are spiritual about crystals. They consider that's a rock, okay, and it's an interesting rock, but it's a you can dig them up out of the ground. That does not make anything spiritual about it. Okay, so I really bristle at that idea of spiritual. Now back to the thing on faith, I bristle at that too because, but I do see for the first time in let's say years or ever maybe that in a sense it really is our faith that gives us meaning. Okay, people do strive for meaning. If they're comfortable enough, they don't have to worry about, at least according to Maslow, they don't have to worry about anything else. They can finally strive for meaning. But the point is that it's not so much faith, and why I bristle at the word faith is because it's not faith. It is the person in whom we have faith should be in my opinion. I mean, opinion here, although I do, whatever. It should be about Jesus, right? It's not about maintaining my faith. I struggle all the time. You asked one thing about John mentioned the thing about millennials. I know for a fact that I can go for a long time without thinking about anything important, and by that I mean Jesus. I can go a long time, so it's just I could extrapolate that into unless I grabbed my brain and forced it to think about Jesus and what he is doing right now and his Father and so on. I have to force myself to do that. Otherwise, I will live in this thing. I'll just go eat drink my coffee, do my work. So it's a big, big deal. And I think it's a default for us to not think about things except for again as spiritual as worshiping idols or what are those things called? Crystals. It was mentioned earlier, didn't it? Now, we'll worship those puppies, but maybe even puppies. But we'll worship those things, and before we actually arrive at something that requires something of us, like Jesus does, Jesus requires stuff of us that we may not like. I will stop making noise now.
Thank you for your comment.
You mean, Scott, that your first response is not necessarily to love your neighbor because you've met your neighbor?
Well, my first response is yes. I'm seeing a lot of people whose first response is not to love their neighbor. Yeah, it comes natural to me. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I was sort of being facetious, but yeah.
I was too.
Yeah. So for most of our history, just historically speaking, the church has always been about a generation away from extinction. I mean, seriously, since the beginning. So on the one hand, I worry. On the other hand, I don't. So I'm inclined to be a worrier. Mm-hmm. It's a genetic thing, the Irish worry. But I don't think our reason for doing this needs to be because we need to recruit a new generation. We need to do this. We need to be faithful for our own sake.
Mhm.
One thing that is helpful to me, you mentioned Oregon, whom I like. Okay, I haven't read everything he wrote, but I've read some things. And yes, I did read that part where he was talking about, yeah, there's no example of praying to Jesus in the Bible. You pray to the Father. And I thought about, and I hope this is helpful to everybody else here, which is, what does it mean to pray in Jesus' name? And I thought about this for, well, it doesn't matter. It suddenly occurred to me, let's say. I hope it's from God. And if it's not, you may reject it, of course. Which is that when you do something in Jesus' name, or in the name of someone, if I use the example of if a doctor tells me to run down to the pharmacy and get me such and such a drug. I run down there to the pharmacy to get the drug for him because a life-saving drug, let's say, and he's not going to give it to me now, is he? It doesn't matter what. But if I say, oh, I'm doing this for Doctor So and So, I'm doing this in his name, I'm doing what he wants in his name, they just might do that. They'll lose their license. That's not the point. The point is, in his name is to do something exactly what he would be asking for. And I think that's helped me a lot when I think about in his name.
Do you all ever wonder about, so when Scott's talking about the things that we do in the name of Christ, have the churches always, we've claimed that we're doing things in the name of Christ, but it seems to me that we've done a whole lot of things in the name of Christ that maybe Jesus would not have asked us to do. You know what I mean? So when we've done that, I think I'm getting at the reputation of Christians, because sometimes when I'm out in my, my fabulously unfashionable weird collar, people act differently around me. And sometimes they're exceedingly deferential, and sometimes they treat me just like I'm some sort of a weirdo, which I may be, but the point is, it's because of the collar.
Mhm.
So what public reputation do Christians have? Anybody ever read the Pew Forum reports? Yeah.
No, I was going to say that during the whole election season, there are in the news media frequent huge generalizations about Christians, and especially white Christians. Occasionally they throw in the word evangelical, but not enough to make me feel better. It's way too much of just Christians, umpty million% of Christians believe. And I think, okay, maybe 3 Christians that I know believe that, but so I think, unfortunately, that's the reputation. Christians tend to be lumped in one homogenous mode that is, number one, just wrong and inaccurate and misinformed and stupid, incorrect. But it also sometimes can be profoundly damaging and offensive to a lot. And I don't know what to do about that, because the word Christian has been co-opted in a very conspicuous way by a certain factions. And I truly, and this is actually a genuine question to you all, because maybe somebody's already come up with an answer, but I am embarrassed to say to people, I would never say to somebody just flat out, I am a Christian. I would feel the need to tack a little paragraph on explaining what kind of Christian I am, blah, blah. And that makes me feel weird and awkward. And I'm sure it is boring when I do that. Does somebody know how to handle this? Somebody already had a brilliant.
Anthony has an idea.
Okay.
I'm a follower of Howard Thurman.
Mhm.
And back in the 1930s, Howard Thurman was in India. Howard Thurman is a Black mystic theologian. He was in India, and one of the people who was ministering to him said to him, "Sir, you are an embarrassment
Mm.
to your religion. And Thurman said, what do you mean? He says, the way Christians are treating Blacks in America, and you fall into that trap by naming yourself Christian, you're an embarrassment. And Thurman's response was, I am a believer of the religion of Jesus Christ.
Mhm.
I deal with the religion of Jesus Christ. Whether that makes me Christian or not, I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. So that is how I respond when people come to me with those kinds of broad strokes. Okay.
It's better. That's helpful. Thank you.
Sometimes when I've identified myself as an Episcopalian, then evangelicals will say to me, oh, so you're not Christian.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not their brand of Christian.
Yeah, I
just-
appreciate. Go ahead, Amy.
Well, I want to reclaim the name Christian for those of us who are not right-wing evangelicals.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I
Ken.
think it's interesting that our presiding bishop uses, we are the Jesus people. We're the followers of Jesus, because the word Christian has become so difficult and so misleading. I know when I was at State College as chaplain there, I met an awful lot of young people, and they have a very poor view of being a Christian.
Mhm.
I would talk to people and put aside that label. So for the sake of entering into discussion, because what I found was the common ground for us all, even the atheists, who the proclaimed atheists, they would all claim love of another. I said, that's what Jesus was preaching.
Mhm.
That's what Jesus was trying to show us, how to love. And if, the Bible, our Bible, talks about God is love. That's the basis of our belief. So we got to disengage from these misconceptions of the word Christian and talk to people about, here you go, Scott, faith. What do we trust in? What is our ultimate trust? It is to hold on to love as demonstrated by Jesus.
If I can come back to what Scott says, and I think I've said this in this context before, the Mennonites have this little adage that if you ask a Mennonite whether they're Christian, they'll say, I don't know, ask my neighbor. And I think that's a good reminder to what Anne is saying, which is that sometimes it's not how we identify, it's what we do. So that's one thing that occurs to me. The other is that I think oftentimes, and I'm not sure this would persuade anybody who thinks Christians are all of a piece, but they make really a fundamentalist error. And the fundamentalists say that everybody's the same if you're religion. Religion is only one thing. And it seems to me that in that sense, they're as guilty of what they don't like in the people they call Christians as the Christians are, if they play to that sort of type. So, but I think sometimes the problem is us. We don't push back hard enough. I think it's not a bad idea to claim who you are and to point out there's some significant differences if you're given the chance. But what we do maybe is more important. That's my point.
Well, I was okay. Got off again. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Kathy, and I know you've been wanting to say.
Yeah, I know. I've been trying. Anyway, some of you may know I'm a follower of Francis, and as a fellowship, we found ourselves in the situation of just reading the words of the prayers. And so, we have a particular method in which we use our prayer services. And so what we did, though, is we went back and really made it so not only did we say the prayers, but then we asked our questions to account actually at the end of the year. How are you showing love to your neighbor? How are you giving service to those around you? How is your prayer transforming your life? And, and really encourage people to, as you said earlier, go into those depths and think about those things, because I think as we do that, we can continue to grow as a fellowship. And I offer that up to others that, it is a way to move beyond just reading the words, but to really implying and integrating the words into your life. So that's what I wanted to share.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Go ahead, Scott.
When I was at Berkeley, I was a brand new Christian from the Jesus Freak movement. When I became a Christian a senior in high school, and there was a guy at Berkeley called Holy Hubert, and Holy Hubert was missing a few front teeth because he was really good preacher, huh? At any rate, I realized maybe some years later that rather than try to keep distancing myself from Holy Hubert, realized that Holy Hubert really was part of my family. And we don't get to choose who's part of our family, so it's sort of a problem, and I think that some of the words that were used, get my wife in here. Some of the words that were used, a follower of Jesus. Yeah, I'm a follower of Jesus, and yes, those other people are my relatives, but I don't know how to answer that properly. But they really are part of the family too. I don't know how to.
Mhm. Did anybody else have any questions or points they wanted to make? So before we go into the last part, which I have some questions for us just to reflect on, I just want to thank you all. That was really good questions and discussions, and a good tie-in. And I hope that this will encourage some more reflections within our own lives and, within church. That yes, it's important to go out there and remind people like what is Christianity for us today, but also that there is a very, very rich, deep, and also harsh Christianity that follows us and that lifts us up, and that is very much a part of even the things that we do as a present. So not to forget that history and the impact of its work now. But also to connect it and tie into what we are doing now, right? So these different things that we're doing, what is the purpose? What is the meaning? And then hopefully being an example for others. So I have some ending reflections.
Before we do that, we need to do share screen again. Is that it?
Yep. Can everybody see the questions?
Mm-hmm.
So I know we're almost out of time, but if we can take 5 minutes, maybe choose one and take some time just to reflect on it. And we'll come back at 55, and whoever wants to share can feel free to do so. And this is just the glimpse of some of the questions we would be diving deeper into in our actual sessions.
I just go through emotion. Yeah, right there. Why don't we do it as a group?
Just this one?
Yeah.
Okay. Actually, we're gonna change it up a little bit. We're actually gonna look at the fourth question. Do you have moments where faith was challenged by life? And what was the process of understanding your faith in that moment? So if we can actually all focus on doing some reflection on that. and we can do it together. You don't have to write it down, just whenever you want to share, jump in.
I again am going to jump in here. My faith is challenged by life all the time. Okay, I pray for something and it doesn't happen, even though I think it's truly in accordance with what Jesus would want. This is a challenge, an ongoing challenge for me, and that. But Jesus says, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? So I have to force myself to have a better attitude and trust that God does love us and wants the best for us. But it's a matter of willpower. I'm being honest here. Not very spiritual, huh?
How about for others?
Yeah, I guess.
Anthony,
Go ahead, Anthony.
thank you. November of 2007 to October of 2008, I was unemployed. We had a mortgage. We had 3 children that we were in the process, we had adopted, who were pre-teens to teens that we needed to support. And we had a lot of bills. Now, remember I said November 2007, October 2008. I was really angry with God. And I consider that time in my life the absence of God. God was nowhere around. October of 2008, I was called and asked to be director of an alcohol recovery program. Out of the blue. I wasn't looking for it. I had sent out hundreds of resumes to no avail. And as, as I got this job and started working and look back over that year, that past year, we never missed a payment on a bill. We never missed a mortgage payment. Our children were always well fed. My relationship with my wife was better than ever. And then when I look back over that period, and I realized that God was there the entire time. I was so bound up in my grief that I could not acknowledge God being there. But in retrospect, I had to acknowledge, look at all that. That was God's doing. So that was when my faith was challenged by real life.
Thank you for sharing.
I think my faith was challenged by life when I lost my daughter, because it was a very sudden and unexpected, and she was in her 20s. And so, there was this whole understanding that how had this gift of life that God had given me, had this happened to her? And it's, it's something you process every day. It never totally heals. And yet at the same time, for me, when I accept communion and I accept the bread or the bread and body, whichever we have, of Christ, for me, that is a way of uniting with my daughter's spirit in my heart. And for me, it brings me some sense of wholeness in my faith, that it took a circle I could never have anticipated or expected. And yet it has allowed me to heal and now begin to help others to heal.
Thank you.
Has anyone ever been told everything happens for a reason? Especially when something especially horrible is happening in your life?
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. So, no, seriously. So I have been told by a number of Christians that everything happens for a reason. And yet there are times that if there were any reason, it would be mysterious, or God might be sadistic. So sometimes I have moved in my faith to a point where I think sometimes things happen and God is there anyway.
Things happen for a reason. How do you explain that to someone whose child has died or been killed, or great grandchild or grandchild? You know, that does not compute in sound theology.
It's inadequate theology, and yet Christians use that all the time to make sense of something that is otherwise inexplicable, instead of sitting in the mystery saying, okay, crap happens.
Yeah, like how about the Holocaust? You know, how can you ever look at that in those terms?
Yes.
It's that always enrages me, that kind of
Yes.
rhetoric.
The polio epidemic, where someone's
So
kid,
many terrible things that have happened, or famine in Africa,
right?
people dying in terrible situations. I mean, there's never any that platitude drives me crazy.
So either God is bipolar, occasionally violent, or maybe we need. So that helped me. That made me revise my theology. And
Yeah.
when I was much younger, I sort of embraced that everything happens for a reason. And then I really just had to revise, or I couldn't have continued to have any belief in God.
Yeah, I would completely lose faith if I thought that's how it was, because there is no reason for some of that.
Yeah.
But I agree with that whole thing of God being present in those terrible times. I've seen that. I lost a young friend to cancer, and just it seemed so inexplicable why this beautiful young life had to end, and why she had to endure such suffering, and a young child was left behind. But you're just looking at the people in her life, people that came together to help her. I was part of her chemo team, a group of us that took turns taking her to chemotherapy and helping to care for her child. And you just saw the love among all the people who cared for her. And that's where I saw God working. But it was still just those kind of things, that kind of loss and suffering is so hard to wrap your head around. Where is God in this? Unless you do frame it in that way, and looking at God working through all of us in trying to help somebody who's suffering.
This thing actually gives us meaning for life too, in that our actions mean something, for good or bad. For good or bad, our actions count. And I think that for me, that was the only way I got out of how can God let these things happen? It's because we have free will, we do things, they're important.
I tend to approach things logically. Scientifically, you say for every action, there's an equal reaction. God created, and then things started happening. And He also made us so that we can tend to the things that happen that are unhappy. We are God's presence here on earth to deal with things like forest fires and floods, because we have done so much to the earth. We have upset our planet. And with the bad things we have done, we also need to show God's love and do the good things to be able to continue living on this earth He gave us.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, everyone. I think we're at time. I really appreciate you all joining. If you are interested in the book, again, that's Rowan Williams' book on being Christian. Thank you.
Before we leave, we were challenged last week by Susan. in terms of the homeless. And I said I would have a report for you today. May I give that, Sir John? Lady Amy.
Go ahead.
Susquehanna House Safe Haven will not be offering a winter shelter for men this year. However, that shelter has been moved to Gospel Fellowship on 7th Street for men. Grace United Methodist Church will have a shelter for women, as well as downtown Daily Bread. And the mission, those are all on the East Shore. There will be other programs provided on the West Shore, primarily in Cumberland County. So there will be shelters available. There will be showers and whatnot available at downtown Daily Bread. Okay, does that answer your question, Susan?
Great,
I'll
yes.
also add that there's 109 beds at the YWCA for women only. And they are very full.
Okay.
Do you have any idea, Anthony, if there are Thanksgiving meals being prepared and distributed?
At this point, no.
Okay,
There will be. I do not know the answer to that, but I've been told that there will be packed lunches and dinners to go because of COVID. And those are at the traditional housing programs that we've been having. Okay.
Thank you.
Now that may change, but at this point in time, that's what I know.
Yeah, I was just looking for an opportunity to, do the old help serve the Thanksgiving
You may
dinner,
want to
but
be in touch with Downtown Daily Bread.
all right. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Anthony. Thanks, everyone, for coming. Next week, we'll hear from members of the Sycamore House, who we are even less likely to see this year. So
Yeah.
good for us to see them on Zoom. So have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next Sunday. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Bye-bye.
Melina. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.